Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's a pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our 107th nonprofit empowerment webinar. Kelli Newman, APR, is president of the Houston-based Newman Newman Incorporated, where she leads a team of talented professionals dedicated to advancing the success of purpose-driven clients. Her national reputation centers on the formulation of broad brand messaging strategies and development of award-winning communication tools for both corporate, nonprofit, and government clients. I think that's about everyone. Kelli is also an instructor at Rice University in their Leadership Institute for Nonprofit Executives. She's coming to us from, I assume, Houston today. First of all, how is the Newman family doing?
We're doing well. Actually, we're on pins and needles because in about 4 weeks, our first grandbaby is going to be born. So
how exciting.
We are at an exciting point in our family, yes.
Wow. So let's see, that going to put it around after Halloween or?
Well, around the last week of October is what we're thinking. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we and are they in Houston too?
Yes, thankfully they live just about 20 minutes away from us.
Are you bonded as babysitters and grandparents?
I just got my pertussis vaccine yesterday, and I'm on line to get my RSV and flu next week. So we're turning into pin cushions too, getting all prepared.
Guess what? This week I got 5 shots. This arm is like deadened. Yeah, I got, let's see, flu, pneumonia, RSV, COVID. Now I'm thinking shingles. By the way, shingles that's the one that you really feel the most, and tetanus. And so I think I'm done for a couple of months. Okay, let's start with something about your firm, Kelli. There are a lot of marketing and communication firms out there, and they all claim to be very good. What sets Newman and Newman apart from all the other communications firms?
Well, you mentioned really the core of what is at the center of what drives our firm, and that is we are dedicated to serving purpose-driven clients. And by that, we mean, well, any and all nonprofits, really, but healthcare, education, social services. We don't work with oil and gas, which is a little ironic because right now I'm sitting in the middle of the energy corridor of Houston, which is where our offices are located. But we don't work with clients in manufacturing and retail. When we formed our firm, which is a full service agency.
Now, pardon me, you all go back, was it to 1996 or way back, right?
Yeah, 94 was actually when we were founded. And then I joined in 96 after I was director of public relations and communications for Texas Children's Hospital at the time. And so, yes, we've been around for a while. And in all of that time, we've really focused on applying our communication strategies, skills, and creative services in advancing the purpose of those organizations that are really working to make a difference in the lives of those that they serve.
Kelli, let's move to the topic of the day and start from square one, if we could.
Okay, sure.
What are some of the most common communication challenges that nonprofits bring to your team for help? And what are some of the most recurring missteps you see being made?
I think I would say two things in answering that question. Number one is, how can we distinguish ourselves from other organizations, either other like organizations or other nonprofits who are not necessarily like theirs, but like all other nonprofits are in that competitive arena of attracting donor support. And one of the mistakes that we see people doing in essentially telling their story is focusing on, say, an inventory list of what they do. So they immediately jump into, here's all the services that we offer, here's all of our departments or whatever. And maybe even talking about how they do it. But they ignore that part about their story that is really what is most attractive to people, and that is the why of what they do. And so what we do when we're working with a client and helping them formulate their messaging is, number one, we will study not just what they are and how they do it, but why they do what they do. And then in the messaging, incorporating not just their purpose, but their organization's values, their organization's culture, and how that distinguishes them, really comes across. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about values and how that factors into communications. The second thing I would say that we see organizations really across industries that we serve making a mistake is not having a strategic communications plan. And usually when I'm speaking to an audience, I'll ask them, okay, raise your hands if you have a strategic business plan, and almost everyone raises their hands. But if I ask who has a strategic communications plan, I may only get one or two. Sometimes when I call on those folks that raise their hand and say, yes, we have a communications plan, what they describe is a calendar of events. And that's not a strategic communications plan. Your strategic communications plan really provides you with that blueprint for success. If you don't have that plan, then you don't really have the objectives articulated that you're working towards. You don't have, you're reactionary. You're responding all the time. Instead of being proactive, you're reacting to certain situations. We all like to gravitate towards tactics. In other words, those tools, those tangibles that you can touch, see, hear. And that makes a lot of sense because they are so formidable. And very oftentimes, I'm sure that people in your audience have had board members or other leadership come to them and say, we need a podcast or we need a billboard. And those things all may be true, but why? In support of what strategy that is designed to achieve a particular objective. And so it can be a little intimidating because I think people feel like their strategic communications plan is something that has to be perfect and is written in stone and never change, but really it should function as almost like a living document that you hold opportunities up against as well, so that when something is presented to you and you can hold it up to that plan and you can see how it serves a particular objective or aligns with a particular strategy, then that can be great. Sometimes there's even opportunities that nobody's able to anticipate, and it's worth setting something aside and saying, well, we're going to put that off until later, and right now we're going to jump on this opportunity. But again, if you don't have that plan that allows you to ask those questions, why, kind of going upstream, then you're not really going to end the year with probably as much success as you might have had otherwise, just because you don't have that measurement and you don't have that blueprint.
You kind of led into this question. You emphasize, like all other organization, a nonprofit's culture is its lived values. What do you mean by that? And how important is that to messaging?
It's so interesting how much I'm being asked to speak on the importance of culture and communicating culture these days. And I think it's because we've reached that point where people understand the significance of culture. And certainly there are generations now who are looking at a company or an organization's culture in considering coming to work for them as employees. So culture has established kind of a new level of significance. We describe a company's culture or an organization's culture as its lived values because that's ultimately what you want a healthy culture to be. No one has to do anything to cultivate an organization's culture. It will happen on its own. But if you want a healthy culture, then that takes some intentional attention. And so when you look at values, it's not just putting words up on a wall, like on a poster that says respect, encouragement, bold or whatever. It's providing unique definition for what those values are. So let's say, for instance, respect is a value of your organization, and respect is very oftentimes found as a value. So, okay, respect, we understand what that means, but what does that mean uniquely to your organization? What does that look like? How does that translate? How do you take those words off that poster and translate them into actionable experiences? So if respect is something that is a value of your organization, how does that show up in the services that you offer the clients that you serve? Or how is respect a value that your donors experience in their relationship with your organization? We worked with a community college not too long ago, and encouragement was a very central part of their culture. And how that translated was a wraparound culture that not only was something that nurtured students in their education career, but it was something that translated into actionable experiences for faculty, for staff, and even for donors. And so sometimes when we're formulating values messaging for an organization, we'll literally get into, so what does that look like? What does that look like to this department? Or what does that look like when you're engaging this particular audience? Or what does that look like in the services that you offer your clients? And so it's not just words that are hanging on a wall, but it literally is something that translates into what is experienced and therefore how it defines your organization's culture.
I wanted to bring up the story. I enjoyed working for our community college system, and one of the colleges had as its core culture or beliefs respect for the environment. And I'll never forget when I went to their first meeting, you were not allowed to bring in a piece of paper to their meeting. And the president goes, I go to all our meetings, everybody hands out like 40 pages of stuff that usually gets tossed. And so we're going to live, not only are we going to save paper, but we want to model this behavior to our students. I never forgot that. I said, that's living your value. You planned ahead. You are not allowed to bring a piece of paper into one of their meetings.
That is so cool. I love that. I've got a couple stories too, if we've got just a minute. I was working with an organization, nonprofit, and I was meeting with a group of their leaders, and it was what we refer to as a communication strategy session. We do that where we ask for input on strengths and challenges and, what are your values? How do you describe your culture? And I asked them, what are the values of your organization? And there were just these blank looks on everyone's face, and they kind of looked around the table at each other. And finally, this one person piped up and said, do we have values? And the person across the table from them laughed and pointed behind her and said, they're right there. They were hanging on a poster on the wall behind them.
Oh boy.
But it was but there were 12 words, 12 values, which was
that everyone uses all the time, probably.
Exactly. And so even though it can be a word like respect that very oftentimes you find, it's really looking at how does that translate. And what's interesting and what I enjoy doing too and working with organizations is creating those definitions and those opportunities for experience. So I'll give you just another quick story. We have an innovation company that we work with. So their purpose is to improve access to water and even remote locations. And so they do work with oil and gas industry and emergency services and construction, those kinds of folks, because those are all industries that have people in remote situations. And they most oftentimes deal with the executive corporate folks because that's who's signing their contracts. But what they did in having respect as part of their values is they instructed their folks that were going out into the field and interacting with that on-site manager. They said, I want you to, visit with them, get to know them. So we treat them with as much respect as we do that C-suite executive that's signing the contract. So they would train their employees on building those relationships and knowing how did their daughter's graduation go, and when is that grandbaby due, and those kinds of things. And so they literally built actions for their employees to demonstrate that respect, and then even more so because they are so committed to the values of their organization and communicating that through action as well as words. They built that into their employee evaluations so that you were held accountable for reinforcing the values of the organization.
That's making it real. Kelli, what advice do you have on the role emotion can play in promoting a nonprofit's communications agenda?
Well, I think that nonprofits, probably better than any other category of organizations, understand the importance of emotion in their storytelling, in part because so much emotion is involved in what they do. But what's interesting is that as humans, we're actually neurobiologically dependent on emotion for making decisions.
You got to help me. What's that word mean?
Neurobiologically?
Yeah.
Means that there are neuroscientific research that shows that if say, for instance, a part of your brain that processes emotions suffers an injury, your ability to make decisions is hampered. And there's all kinds of really interesting research around that. And I'm trying to think of the neuroscientist that is especially well known, and his name escapes me right now. But as nonprofit leaders and development professionals, obviously motivating decisions towards supporting an organization is very important. So that's why a dry inventory of your services, or that laundry list, as I say, of the logistics of what it is that you do, it might be important in some respects once you get to that. But in telling your story, it really is important to engage emotion. It's essential in generating not only support, financial support, but even marketing the services of your organization. Now, your why, an organization's why, in other words, why does it exist? Why is it important? That is at the heart of where your emotions are. And so that is a very important part of your communication. But there are several cautions, let me share with you. Number one, the emotion must be genuine. We have all gotten very used to and can identify when we're being played. In other words, gratuitous emotion is not only not going to work for you, it can be offensive. So when, the violins start playing, or the sad faces or the sad eyes start showing up, people check out. It's dismissed because as I say, it's gratuitous. And so it must be genuine. The other point I would make with emotion is that the more emotional the topic, the greater the care, or the greater the expertise that's needed in handling it. So for instance, as we have worked with an organization that provides counseling and support to children who have lost a parent or a sibling, if I come to you and I start talking about that, your guard is going to go up big time, because that is clearly a highly emotional topic.
Yeah.
So it's important to not only be able to successfully engage in that topic, but it also is important that you don't even appear as being exploitive in that highly emotional topic.
And that can be challenging, can it?
Absolutely. I mean, you might think, oh, well, gosh, we have this highly emotional purpose, so we've got it made. you actually are probably walking a tighter tightrope than somebody who's not dealing with quite as emotional of a topic or a service. The other thing is that I think people make a common mistake of thinking that emotion, or defining emotion as bringing tears to people's eyes or causing people to cry. And I think I've shared this story with you before, Jim, where I was contacted once by a woman who said she was with a nonprofit, and she said, I need a video for a nonprofit that will make the audience cry 3 times. And I thought, what? Where did that come from? There's not a formula for emotion. That goes back to the point about being genuine. But pride and enthusiasm and all of those kinds of things are emotions that are equally, if not more, motivating. So don't get stuck in thinking that incorporating emotion into your story means that you've got to, evoke tears in some way. I think ultimately what you want emotion in your communications to do is to inspire that I want to be part of that reaction. And oftentimes what we'll do in working with a client is ask them, what is that result? What is that reaction you're looking for from the audience that this communication is engaging? What is it that you're ultimately hoping that they'll do? Yeah, of course, make a donation, but what is that emotion that you want to evoke in them? And very oftentimes, whether it's volunteers, whether it's donors, whether it's even recruiting new employees, it's that I want to be part of that. I'm enthusiastic. I can see where I'm going to be able to make a difference with that organization. So that kind of gives you I guess maybe an overview of emotion.
Yeah. We also keep on hearing about the power of storytelling a lot. Storytelling. How does a nonprofit go about the job of selecting its most powerful stories that it can spotlight?
So I think that one of the most important things to do is look at what are those stories that most clearly illustrate who you are and why you are. So the more we use the analogy of concentrated orange juice, the more pure or dense and obvious that a story can be, the better it is, because what that does is, number one, it doesn't require a lot of explanation. People can connect those dots relatively easily. But it does a great job of reinforcing out there in the community who you are and where you sit at the table. So let me use another analogy that we like to use. When we're helping an organization distinguish themselves, we ask them, what is that table that you sit at? And let's go back to the community college as an example. A community college sits at that bigger table of higher education.
Right.
And so in telling their story, they need to be able to talk about what are the benefits of community college in terms of training for very needed skills in the community, the financial benefit of less expensive education, all those kinds of things. So that's the large table that they sit at. But then when they sit at that table of community colleges, what distinguishes them, or what is the advantage that they represent or with everyone else around that table? Because everyone has a seat at the table. You don't have to, kick the chair out from underneath the guy sitting next to you. But what is it that uniquely defines you? And so when you're looking at what stories do we tell, it's what are those stories that most clearly illustrate who you are and what uniquely defines your impact and your reason for sitting at that table. And where, from the perspective of the donor, they can readily see how their support can make a difference. I can see how the impact of this, or I can see the impact that this organization is having on an issue, a problem, in providing a solution. So those are really core considerations when you're thinking about what story. And then also, of course, what are the emotions that you want to tap into? What does this represent as far as the emotion you want to evoke in that audience member? I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, we're talking about storytelling, but there's still a place for facts and figures. I think I was guilty of fact fatigue. We had a tendency to throw out 80% of this and 65% of this and 2000 of this.
Right.
But how should a nonprofit prudently choose which facts and figures can accompany its stories?
So I think that just like in selecting what stories you tell, is you look at what are the facts, what's the data that you have to share that reinforces that story. So if it is, let's just say, I'm going to pull this out of the top of my hat. Let's say that your organization provides high school education to homeless teenagers. And you have a graduation statistic of maybe it's 100%, maybe it's 90%. That statistic of, say, like 90%, let's just be a little bit not quite as elusive. So let's say it's even 90% for what you're doing. And for your school district, their graduation rate is maybe 85%. And so where you can show, look at how well we're doing in providing education to this special needs, let's say, audience in comparison, that's a really important part of your story and being able to demonstrate its success. Now, where I think people get really hung up is just like the inventory of services that they offer, they provide an inventory of statistics. So really,
the kitchen sink, really.
Oh, for sure, for sure. If you can think of statistics, weaving statistics into story, that's the best way to use it, or in support of story. So I don't have any problem with there being, say, even on your website, narrative that tells your story, and then to the right, very easy, at a glance, kind of factual, even maybe graphic illustrations that of facts that reinforce that. Great. But don't just give me dry statistics separate and aside from story. But statistics are super important, and especially for donors, because they want to obviously have some kind of reassurance that you're going to be a good steward of their funds. And so they're interested in knowing that not just this is the solution that you offer, but it's an effective or successful solution. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that, of course, is through facts, but always within proximity of story.
Yeah. Donors are in a tough position because they're not choosing between the good and the bad. They're choosing between the good and the good. So what's your advice to nonprofits to help them think through what separates them from other good causes?
Well, my first thought is to go back to that analogy I used of what defines your seat at the table. Again, it's not to think of the world as, from a scarcity mindset that, if someone else gets a piece of the pie, it means it's less for me. I wouldn't get caught up in all of that, but I would certainly think about, okay, if we are sitting at this table, what is it that we offer that represents that particular solution or that unique impact? I'll tell another story about an organization that we worked with, and this was really interesting because we had been brought on to do messaging and a strategic communications plan in advance of some of the other creative services like website and all that kind of thing. And our team had studied them for at least a good 2 months in reviewing their materials and going through their website and having a few individual meetings. And then we conducted one of those communication strategy sessions where we were asking questions. And I think that it was like at the end of a 2-hour session. And this was an organization that sits at the homelessness table. So to their right might be a shelter, to the left might be the food bank. And we were trying desperately to figure out what it is that where did they sit? And they worked largely with adults in helping them to better manage their finances, maybe even to find jobs. But these were folks who were, through a variety of circumstances, facing either eviction or having to move continuously. And so again, it was they fit in with a whole lot of other organizations in that same market. And finally, in that last 5 minutes, somebody said, well, of course, it's for the children's education. And we stopped and we said, what? And they said, well, the reason why we do all of this is because we're working to keep children in the same school, because we know that if a child's education is interrupted, that decreases their chances of, finishing their schooling, of graduating, of going on to higher education, of launching a successful career, of learning how to successfully form relationships and all of that. And it was like, oh my gosh, where did this come from? That is what distinguishes you. So we rebranded them, we renamed them, we changed everything to make that.
I don't know what it is about the last final minutes of a meeting is so golden.
That's really true, because it was, and we had, as I said, my team, I was looking at them and they all just looked dumbfounded. And I know they all wanted to say, do you understand? We have been studying you for 2 months, and this is the first time that we've ever come across this. So, and they said it like, well, of course, everyone understands that's our purpose. And no one did. And it wasn't reflected in their name or any of their communications. So I think that you have to, as an organization, recognize that, of course, there are a lot of other great nonprofits out there, whether they are doing something similar to you or not. But what I think you're really charged with in your storytelling is being able to explain, and sometimes it's even going back to what was the motivation for your organization being founded. In other words, what was the need in the community that warranted your organization to be formed in the first place? What was that missing solution, and how are you uniquely skilled in being able to deliver on that solution?
Kelli, what do you say we engage a few members of our virtual audience? Welcome, Randa, who is South Texas representative for Water 4. Why don't you take a second to talk about Water 4, and more specifically, the challenge of how Water 4 can separate itself from and stand out from all the other good causes?
Right. So what I know about Water 4, first of all, what I love about what they say about themselves is that they're fueled by love and inspired by hope. And I think that's a great place to start, especially in relation to what all you've been talking about, especially as far as values and really digging into what do people need to know. But in addition to providing, much needed funds, Water 4 emphasizes sustainable businesses, which is leaving African communities with the infrastructure and the know-how to continue to provide themselves with supplies of clean water in perpetuity. So, that's a really heartfelt and strong mission. But I would love to know Kelli's thoughts, on how we can better incorporate some of what we've talked about today. Just what strikes you immediately based on that mission.
Well, this is a good time that Kelli's giving free advice. So, okay.
Okay, Randa, take this down. No, but what you did was you brought up a really great point, and I'm so glad that you did, because a lot of times you mentioned sustainability. Obviously, sustainability is a very timely topic right now, and it's only going to become more so. And so part of what you can do as an organization is look at where do you fit in the national conversation and how do you use that to elevate the significance of what you do. So it's almost like you're capitalizing or you're leveraging what's showing up on that front page in terms of the interest and the attention that that's generating and attaching yourself to that, kind of like writing the tailcoats of it. And so where you can plug your story into, hey, we all understand sustainability is super important, and this is what we're doing, or this is the commitment we have to that. You're capitalizing on, you're not having to generate from zero the attention that that topic is being given. You're connecting yourself with something that's already been elevated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I liked how you said showing up on the front page. That's exactly what we want, especially on a national or global scale here.
Okay,
Well,
thank you, Randa. We also do some job boarding, Kelly, and this is not the first time, but Kathy, I think you wanted to mention a position that you all have open to development professionals, and you're sharing the link. Could you take a minute to discuss that?
Yes, I did just share the link. We have an assistant director of development position open at Haku. This position is primarily responsible for working with non-federal grant research and submissions, specifically with foundations and private organizations. And then also will lead our annual campaign, including our alumni outreach efforts. So that's the primary roles of that position. And I did post the link, so would definitely invite anybody who is interested. And then if you have questions, feel free to just reach out to myself. I'll put my email address in the post as well.
Okay, Kathy, and let's give you the homework of the day. In a sea of choosing between not the good and the bad, but the good and the good, how does Haku define itself from all the other good causes out there?
So our mission is the champions of Hispanic higher education success, and we represent 572 Hispanic serving institutions across the United States, which enroll over 3.5 million undergraduate Hispanic students. And so we lead from a national level in terms of working with the institutions to make long-term impact for education overall, but specifically Hispanic students in higher education, and then specifically with the students to provide scholarships, internships, and career and leadership development, because we know that if students are not having to worry about the financial piece of their education, they're able to focus on the academics and succeed. So that's nationally. Regionally, we hold career and leadership summits in 5 locations across the United States each year to serve students in those areas and work with our corporate, federal, and nonprofit partners around talent and acquisition, their desire to diversify their workforce by bringing on Hispanic talent. And then locally, we work with the high schools, the community colleges, and the universities, 4-year universities, providing financial literacy and entrepreneurship training for high school and undergraduate college students as well. We do other things locally, but those are probably the high points right now going on at Haku.
Thank you, Kathy. Katie, you are donor service director for communities in school. How would you define how communities in school stands out from all these other good causes?
Okay, well, I'm the donor relations coordinator for communities and schools of San Antonio. And we are actually one of 135 affiliates in the country of communities and schools, and it's the nation's largest and most effective organization that's dedicated to keeping kids in school and to helping them succeed in life. And we actually have a pretty unique model where we position site coordinators inside schools, and they assess students' needs and provide them with resources to help them succeed both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, whatever resources that they may need to do so. We partner with local businesses, social service agencies, healthcare providers, and volunteers throughout the community in order to help students And whether it's food, school supplies, healthcare, counseling, academic assistance, or even a positive role model that these students may need, we do whatever we can to provide that for them. And Communities in Schools is there to help them. And that, to me, is our why we do that. And so for nearly 40
She's
years,
listening. She's listening.
for nearly 40 years, Communities in Schools of San Antonio has been helping students to achieve in school, to graduate, to go on to brighter futures. And our mission is just to surround students with a community of support, both in and out of the classroom, and to empower them to stay in school and to achieve their goals and dreams in life, basically.
Katie,
Great.
let me just interrupt. Let me
Please, go
interject
ahead.
that we have a member of our team, one of our communication strategists, benefited from Communities in Schools herself when she was in high school. So I can tell you that as an employer, I have seen all the benefit that ultimately that can generate. So it's a wonderful.
And by the way,
organization.
Kelly, when we talk about powerful storytelling, sharing your success stories like that can be very powerful. How
Oh, of
people have
course.
moved forward in the community.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
And we're in the home stretch here. Kelly, most of our participating nonprofits are either small or mid-size. In fact, I read somewhere that 88% of all nonprofits, and there's 1.5 million in the country, have annual budgets of around $500,000. They're small. And given that restricted budget environment, how do they pick and choose the communication strategies, tools that will most effectively push them forward?
Well, I think, first of all, it's recognizing your needs and your capacity. So if very oftentimes we'll work, for instance, in partnership with, I mean, sometimes it's just a one-person office. It's not, people like us don't always work with large organizations either. So part of it is knowing your needs and your capacity. And when is it time to bring in maybe some outside help? I would say most oftentimes what an organization like us, when we're brought in, is to formulate, say, a strategic communications plan or something like that, where, I mean, I can describe it, but you really benefit from the professional communication skills in having something like that developed. Now, once it is, how that's executed also comes down to, okay, we can do this in-house, but for instance, we don't necessarily have video production skills. So that's something we need to go out of house on. So recognizing what your needs are and what your capacity is, I think, is probably a first step. I also think that even developing in the early stages of an organization, developing a relationship with professional communicators can be a valuable thing, where even if it is, hey, what we need is we need help with our organizational or audience specific messaging. And then maybe someday when we're bigger and we have the funds, then, we'll come back to you. But to start formulating that relationship, I think, can be helpful in the long-term growth of an organization. I think also, and in fact, Jim, I know that you're aware of it and you were kind enough to include it in one of your newsletters. We had an article published recently in Nonprofit Pro magazine. So the way you can find it is,
was that the milestones piece?
Yeah. Just if you just Google Nonprofit Pro magazine and my name, Kelli Newman, the article will pop up. But what it does is it goes through what we've identified as 5 milestones of messaging that challenge every nonprofit. It doesn't matter how old or how big you are. And I think in there too, there's some good guidance on what needs to be, what might be helpful at what stage of your organization. And in terms of even regaining relevance, if you're a legacy organization that people aren't just making automatic donations to. So I would suggest that as maybe a resource.
And can I make this request? we're going to post a summary right about at the close of this webinar. Would you mind going to my LinkedIn page and attaching that piece? Because it really
Sure.
is rich. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm writing
Very good.
myself a note right now.
Good. And let's move, and we don't have too much time left. Evaluation. I know this is a tough one. You know, it's like herding cats. How can nonprofits evaluate the effectiveness of various communication tools and strategies?
Well, I'm going to take you back to that strategic communications plan, because when you put that together, not only are you identifying what are the objectives that you want to achieve, but also you're defining what are those measurable objectives, so that as you're moving along in progressing forward, you have those milestones identified for yourself in terms of measuring your success, measuring your growth. There's, you know, to assign any one particular tool for measuring outputs and results, that's difficult to do. But I would say that the time to identify what's to be measured and how that can be measured is at the outset. So let's say that you are, and sometimes it's not just as black and white as, well, did we meet the goal of our capital campaign? A lot of times it is in how have we advanced our relationships with particular audience members and that kind of thing. So as you're even developing those goals for yourself or those objectives, plug into that. Okay, how are we, not only what is it we want to do, but how are we going to measure our success along the way? And that may not be in numbers or statistics, but have a measurable outcome that you're working towards. And that always is a valuable mindset to adopt.
Yeah. Kelli, you made a little reference before. What are your suggestions on engaging board members in communicating the nonprofit story?
This is something that we encourage people to do all the time. And that is, first of all, once you have developed your messaging, and by messaging, there's basically two tiers to your messaging. There's organizational messaging, which is that overarching, universal, regardless of who you're talking to, it has relevance. And then there's audience specific messaging that addresses those unique perspectives and concerns of all the different audiences that you're looking to engage or who utilize your services. And one of the things that will be called in to do occasionally, but you can do this yourself, is to train your board members on what that messaging is. Because like it or not, they are your ambassadors out in the community, and they're making up your story unless you are giving it to them. And of course, they're doing it with the best of intentions because they are there to support you. They have aligned themselves with you as a board member, but they may not always tell that story the best way, or they might leave some really important things out. So training your board members on what it is that you want them to be able to say about your organization is really important. The other thing is to enlist their input on your communication so that they feel like, number one, you gain their buy-in, and that just makes your life easier all the way around. But it also is helpful in them understanding. So if they come to you and they say, we need a billboard or we need a podcast, and you say no, it's not just flat no, it's they understand why, because this is where we're putting our energy, our resources, our focus now. But, and so you can appreciate why that doesn't fit here. So if you keep them, I mean, that internal communications is really just as important, if not more so, with your board and your volunteers and your employees as it is with your external audiences.
Right. I don't think any discussion of communicating with donors would be complete without social media, which is a tool that's open to really a great vast majority of nonprofits, no matter what their budget is. What is your advice and counsel for getting the most bang out of social media?
Make sure, just like the storytelling that we talked about before, make sure that it reinforces who you are and why you are. So if it is National Syrup Day, you do not have to post. You do not have to try and make some ludicrous connection between your organization and syrup. You know, you don't have to be on there every day. Don't get caught up in the volume so much. As much as the quality of what it is that you're posting and how it reinforces who you are, your significance, the solution you offer, the impact that you're achieving. And what we'll do is we'll work with clients sometimes in identifying what are those categories in which you are generating posts. What are those 3 or 5 categories that reinforce your organization's unique seat at the table? And then use that as criteria for what it is that you are doing. If let's say if your school is known for its international student population, then make sure that the photos that you're posting on your social media clearly illustrate an international population. Make sure that the content is reinforcing that unique position that you hold.
Okay, Michael, if you could post Kelli's contact information. Kelli, I left the most important question for last. Do you all know if that first grandchild is going to be a boy or a girl?
Yes, we know that he is a big boy right now.
Oh,
He is,
okay, okay.
he's
No
weighing-
secrets.
He's weighing in right now at 87th percentile in weight and 97th percentile in head size. So my poor precious daughter-in-law is a little bit freaked out that she has 4 more weeks to go. But yes, we're very excited and can't wait to just snag him and hold him to death.
Yeah. Well, all the best to your family. And again, thank you again for this encore presentation. Michael, I saw you put up the contact information. Are you in a position to put up that contact slide? And let me tell you, okay, let's put that up for a moment. Kelli, again, thank you so much for being such a rich resource for our learning community of professional and volunteer nonprofit leaders. And thank you for the way you have provided leadership, not just regionally, but nationally, to the practice of public relations. And it is an honor to partner with you. So thank you very much. And here's to that. Sounds like you're going to have a linebacker. And a big grandson is on the way. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience. Kelli, thank you and be well.